Hi, I'm Colleen Pearl, the Cool Crone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be looking at astrology, which I have not done in a little while, but you know that I'm a capable astrologer because I'm wearing glasses, whatever that means. Anyway, I'm going to look at the chart of Donald Trump and what's going on right now in brief, and then I'm going to also look at the chart of King George III, who was the ruler of England at the time that the American colonies were trying to break away from him as king and establish themselves as their own sovereign nation. So without further ado, let's take a look at these charts. These are the natal charts for Donald Trump and King George III of England. So we notice right away they both have Leo rising. Both Leo rising, which is not unheard of for a king. A lot of kings have very dominant Leo traits in their chart, or actually have Leo rising, or are actually Sun in Leo. Now in this case, both George and Donald share a sun sign, and that is Gemini. So here is Donald's sun in Gemini. Here's the symbol for Gemini. Here's the sun. And here is George's sun in Gemini as well. And what we notice about Donald is that his sun is at 22 degrees of Gemini, so fairly deep into Gemini, and it's very close to Uranus. It's only about 5 degrees away. It's at 17 degrees of Gemini, and also they have the involvement of the North Node. Now, the sun at the moment of Donald's birth was directly across the sky from the moon, which was in Sagittarius. And this means that Donald was born on an eclipse. This is also a predominant feature of many monarchs, especially the monarchs for England. A lot of their monarchs, I can't say that word, were born on eclipses. And P.S., I believe Kate Middleton and William are both born on eclipses. Okay, I'm going to have to let Mab out. She's very uncomfortable with recording, so give me a moment here. Okay, Mab is safely out of the room, and she got an extra couple of treaties for being so polite. All right, so back to George and Don. We know that Don was born on an eclipse and George was not. George was born actually with his moon in quincunx to his sun in the sign of Capricorn, but he also has the involvement of Uranus very close to his moon. Now the sun and the moon are the two most personal planets in a chart, and so what we can derive from this is that both men have a touch of madness. Now in the case of King George, he actually had a physical condition that caused the madness. I believe it's pronounced porphyria, and that was suspected in his life, but also proven after his death by some sort of test. So that's it. They're both Geminis, they're both Leo rising, and they both have a strong involvement of Uranus near their very most personal planets. A couple of other things to note. In Donnie's first house, he has Pluto. This makes him a power seeker and a power broker. But his Pluto is not very well aspected. It does have a sextile to Neptune, so foreign figures would be a part of his power structure, his power base. But his Pluto just having the sextile to Neptune would just give him a very wild imagination and the gift of gaslighting, I would say. So that's where Pluto is very active for Donnie. But on Donnie's ascendant, we have Mars. Mars in Leo, and we also see Mars in a very strong position in King George's chart. It is actually conjunct his midheaven in Aries. So a Mars in Aries is very, very strong. It's in its ruling sign. And conjunct the midheaven would make him a very military-minded, aggressive leader. So he's very aggressive, very military-minded. Now, Donnie is not so military-minded, but remember his big love of generals. That's the Leo portion of it. It's all a show to him. It was a big show to Georgie too, Now, George's ascendant is 0 degrees of Leo, a very, very special degree of Leo at the very beginning of his sign. That's exhibiting very strong characteristics of the sign of Leo at that point. Now, Donnie is also very, very strong Leo rising, but his Leo rising degree is actually 29 degrees of Leo. And remember, he has that Mars very, very close to his ascendant. So Donnie and George share having a very, very sensitive degree of Leo in their rising. That makes them very much the flamboyant leaders, the leaders who want to have their way, the leaders who will brook no argument, well, depending on a few other things. But Leo rising and that very sensitive degree makes them kind of makes it a sure bet that they were going to be very successful leaders and raised to a very high level. And of course they both did, or have, because Donnie's still alive. Oh, and one more thing that they have in common is that they both have Venus conjunct Saturn. So here is George's Venus conjunct Saturn right here in Gemini. Now Trump's Venus and Saturn is in Cancer. And that makes him, I believe, a little more needy, a lot more prickly, a lot easier for him to take offense with things. So Saturn Venus is usually a person who is insecure. And in both cases, I think it shows up for these people, these men, that they are not particularly secure in and of themselves. And this Uranus involvement causes them to flash out or break out or do things spontaneously due to their insecurity, due to their lack of security in themselves. And Donald, of course, being in that very needy sign of Cancer, exhibits his in a very, very emotional, needy way. And that aspect to the moon is also your needs and emotions. So that would just amplify that. Plus, the aspect here, the quincunx, makes it uncomfortable, makes it feel very awkward for Donnie. So he can't sit still. It's like he just can't move on to the next thing until he lashes out, until he maybe puts people in their place, even to make him feel better. So this explains a lot of Donald's wanting to put people down in order to lift himself up. Now with George, he's a little bit different. He does have the quincunx from the sun to the moon, and the moon there with Uranus is the lashing out too. And I do know that as reading just a tiny, tiny little snippet of history about King George III, he was painted with a very bad PR brush in those days, in the 1700s, because we are looking at most of our history through the lens of the United States. And of course, they didn't like King George III. They didn't want to be ruled by a king, and so they tried to make him look as bad as possible, even to the point of claiming that he was insane. And to be sure, he did have some real mental problems due to the porphyry, or porphyria. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. I know I'm saying it wrong. But with Donald, I think, it's up front and center that he is having these real moments of insanity. Okay, so that covers the real gist of it. The only thing is that in the case of George III, we also have Neptune very close to Venus. So that's another way that we can see that although that doesn't necessarily confer madness on a chart, but it will lean that way, but more so it will lean towards someone who can be persuaded rather than them doing the persuading. With Trump, it's him doing the persuading. He's got that very strong Pluto sextile Neptune in the first house, so he's the one holding the power there. With George, he held some power because he was king and the sun is there, but really that Venus-Neptune connection is very strong, and in many cases that's a person that can be talked into things pretty easily. Okay, so those are the similarities between George and Donald. So as you can see, there's a good chunk of similarity between these two guys. Okay, so now we're going to switch over and look at what was going on for King George at the time of the Battle of Yorktown. I looked up what was the final and decisive battle of the Revolutionary War, and it was the Siege of Yorktown. And the end of that battle was October 19th, 1781. And this might not have been like the moment they really started losing, but I figured this was close enough. This was going to give us an idea of what was going on for King George at that time astrologically. And I do believe that by this time he was pretty well mad, sick, whatever he was. And so, I mean, it could be that he was almost out of the picture, but let's just look at his chart and see what was happening here. So one thing that I see is that Mars and Pluto were transiting his 7th house, and that's opposite his ascendant. So real challenges to his power, real challenges to his military right here by having them in the 7th house. They also were trying his Chiron in the 11th house. So if he was sick, if he was, battling something, that was sort of fueling that and not giving him any quarter, not really giving him any breaks there. We also had transiting Neptune, which is down here, in opposition to his Mars on the MC. And so this is another challenge where he was not going to be seen by the public in a clear light. There was going to be a lot of gaslighting, a lot of delusion about his own reputation and what he was capable of doing. So that was going on. And this transiting Neptune also was trining the Mars-Pluto in his 7th house. So he did have some things going on, but again, that Neptune was clouding things. Neptune is also famous for dissolving boundaries. So for George to be losing his colony, that's a big dissolution of a boundary. Like, okay, no more. You don't even have that boundary anymore. You don't have that nation anymore. So that's where I see Neptune being extremely effective here. And then we had transiting Saturn opposite his Sun. So transiting Saturn was down here directly up in opposition to his Sun. So that was giving him rejection, separation, inability to hang on to what was his, basically. And that's also a big blow to his ego. And so that is what I see here. So Venus is in opposition to his Chiron as well, which, would have been good for him, actually, for healing, but I think it's also his position right here is vulnerable. He's not doing really, really well with things. And this isn't a really in-depth analysis of the transits in his chart at this time. I'm more looking at it in terms of what he is losing militarily and the losing the colony of the United States. Now, if we look at this chart, this is the United States on the same date and what was coming up for them. Well, they had Jupiter and Venus on the cusp of their ascendant. So, of course, the United States was going to prevail. They were going to be doing very, very well. They did have Saturn and Juno in their transiting their first house. So Saturn there means that, they've been working very hard at establishing who they are, at working on their identity and establishing themselves as a sovereign nation. Let's see, Uranus was going over their Venus, so they were getting sudden bursts of energy pertaining to support from other countries, I believe. France was really helping us out in the Revolutionary War. So that's a little bit of the Uranus information there. We are also getting some help from some other countries. And what else do we have here? Here's the Mars and Pluto. And Mars and Pluto here is not really opposing anything except our North Node. So Mars and Pluto opposing our North Node gives us a big shot of adrenaline where it comes to our mission, our purpose, what we are as a country, what we hope to achieve as a country. So without going too far in depth here, we can just see that it was actually a pretty glorious time for the United States. That was this young, fledgling nation trying to come into being. Also, their sun was in their 11th house of the chart in an air sign, just like George's sun is in the 11th house in an air sign. So I think George felt very much like he wanted to have the United States as one of his colonies, but it wasn't meant to be. The United States was going to establish itself as a sovereign country on its own. So now let's look at DJT. And where are the planets affecting him? And is it in any way similar to what was going on at the Battle of Yorktown? In this chart for Donald, we have Mars in the 12th house coming up on that Saturn-Venus conjunction. So I think this is going to be a challenge for him. So Mars has passed over this part of his chart several times, and this is going to probably be the third pass, and then it's going to go into his first house where he's going to be very angry, and it's going to hit his Pluto, and he's going to get really, really angry about all of this. Right now, it's not in a super, super strong position. We've got Pluto still in the 7th house for him. So that's just really taking a wrecking ball to his relationships. Now, it seems that his relationship with his wife is pretty strong for some reason. I guess her contract lawyers are really well paid. But as far as his power and his ability to make good connections with, say, foreign leaders or business leaders, no bueno for Donald, probably for the next 20 years. So, and then we see that the Sun and Saturn and the North Node are traveling together in his 8th house, just about through his 8th house, along with Neptune. This is the house, traditionally, other people's money. So he has had a lot of other people's money involved in his political career. But I think that Saturn here is meaning, and Saturn, notice, is pulling up the rear in this little group of planets as they move around. So Saturn is going to call the tune and make him pay the piper. So at some point, Donald is not going to be very happy with his relationships with other people who are giving him money. That's not going to fare well for him. And then we have Neptune just almost coming into Aries, which when it does go into Aries will really show all of his foreign relationships and bring all that stuff into the fore. And he's got Venus and Mercury there now, so we are already beginning to see a light being shown on his foreign relationships. Uranus is still hanging out near Algol, up by his midheaven, so still a lot of changes to his fortunes as far as his career goes, and Jupiter up here in the 11th house. Now, Jupiter isn't always the benefic that you think it is. Sometimes it can be overmuch, and in this case, I think it will be. When it hits Jupiter again, I think we'll see Donald have an overstimulation of that Uranus energy, and possibly, I don't want to predict a medical things, but it might just be him becoming very angry and having a big display publicly on the world stage that really just shoots him in the foot. So that's what I'm seeing for Donald here. Clearly he is not doing bad, actually, but just, not doing great as far as the world stage is concerned. So that is what I have for Donald Trump and King George and the United States. I can do, if you like this video, please leave it in the comments if you'd like me to do something comparing what happens to the United States and Donald Trump in coming months. I could do a sort of running commentary on that. I do think, like most psychics right now, March is going to be a significant month for everybody, for this country, for the world actually, and I do think that April will expand on the opportunities and the information that is brought forward in March. I feel between April and August we're going to have a lot of developments on this front, and eventually I do see the Trump administration being swept out of the White House and something else coming in. But stay tuned and we'll figure out what that something else is. Okay, thank you very much for watching this video. I hope it wasn't too long for you. And of course, respect the glasses because that means I'm saying something smart. All right, everybody, I'll see you next time. Thank you.